afternoon, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the sessions so far. Now, in the last 12 to 18 months, I've had lots of phishing attacks. I've also had WhatsApps and texts late at night, pretending to be my kids needing help. I've had my credit card and I've had my personal details exposed by a large company. And I've also had my social media hacked. I think, like many of you in the room, it's not difficult to feel the vulnerability of our digital lifestyle. But on the other hand, I don't think I've ever done quite so much online shopping. And beside the clothes and the food that I normally do, I've bought a house, a mortgage. I've done insurances, I've actually done my taxes, fortunately. And I've bought other bits and pieces, including travel, in a different way and with lots of confidence. Now, the difference between how I feel about the vendors on the one side of that equation versus the others are the way they treat my data and my financial stuff, and the same with my loved ones. Because it really goes to the heart of the experience, and it builds trust there, perhaps more so than the advertising and the brand messages that got me to fall in love with those products first time round. Now, if you also asked me 12 to 18 months ago if I, as a commercial business leader, thought that trust and safety was my job, I'd have probably said no. I think it's more for IT or for security or something back office. So forgive me, colleagues who work in that and the experts in the room. But I genuinely stand here today as a business leader who believes it's my responsibility to put the time and the resources into this topic. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but I fundamentally believe it can be and is a driver for value. So that's why it's not hard to be excited about being part of this conversation this afternoon, where we're going to take two sides to the story. We're going to look outside and get an external perspective to this industry from elsewhere and see what we can learn. And then I'll be inviting Marnie back to the stage too to give us a perspective of what Booking's doing, how we're thinking, and how we can put that all together to actually get on the front foot in our collective industry and make this a part of travel for good. So let's look outside first, and please join me in welcoming to the stage INSEAD's Professor of Technology Management, Professor Theodoros Evgeniou.
Thank you, Fiona. A pleasure to be here in exciting times. I've been in the space of technology and business for almost 30 years now. And much like a number of you probably have seen amazing progress. To begin with, we are in an event of Booking, which is one of the major companies being built back in the dot-com boom. And the internet economy started, what, around 30 years ago almost, 25, 30 years ago. And now we have another revolution, the AI revolution. And who knows what's next. I must say I'm a geek as a character, so I love these innovations. Technology moves the needle of civilization in some ways, creates markets, builds markets. It's moving really, really fast, and we are arguably in very exciting times. There are lots of scientific arguments one can make why what we hear today about AI actually is a big deal. We're still early days, of course, but it's a big deal for many reasons, which are also scientific in many ways, but I'm going to spare you on that one. Now, one thing that has been clear is that even though change, some people say is exponential, whatever it is, it's definitely fast. We don't change that fast. There is usual kind of tension between fast technological change and slow human/organization/cultural change. There is a famous quote about the biggest challenge of technology adoption by a Harvard Business School faculty, actually, back in the 60s, who said the biggest challenge in technology adoption is change of human behavior. That's the biggest challenge. Now, this is good news and bad news. Of course, it's bad news if you want to adopt technologies, but in some ways it's good news because at least some fundamentals don't change. And let me start with one example of such fundamentals that relates to trust and safety and to what you are all working on. And this doesn't change no matter what the technology does, at least not for the, it seems it will not change. There is no reason to believe it will. Point number one of something that does not change. I'll refer to an article of a Nobel laureate in economics back, 50 years ago? 55, wow, 55 years ago. Who talks about the market of lemons, a concept maybe some of you have seen in your courses somewhere. And what's the idea here? There's lots of technical concepts in this work about information asymmetry and other kind of technical concepts, let's say, but the fundamental idea is the following. When trust breaks, markets break. Very simple. You cannot have a marketplace or a market exist without trust. It simply breaks. The so-called famous market of lemons, right? His main examples, he has examples in this paper. If you read the paper, it's fantastic to read, by the way. He has examples from all sorts of different markets. The famous one is the one about used cars market, where some cars there are lemons, not good quality, and the buyers don't know which ones those ones are, and that creates a collapse to the market. A race to the bottom, the market disappears. And they got the Nobel Prize because of this. So no matter how technology changes, human nature will not change as much, at least in the foreseeable future. Trust will be important to create market activity. So it's an existential reason to begin with to focus on trust and safety. Now, of course, there are other individual, not marketplace level, not industry level. This is an industry level reason to focus on trust and safety. There is also a company level, a brand level. And that, I'm talking probably to the converted. This is just a statistic, but I'm sure there are tons of those variations out here. Brand safety. At the end of the day, brand is like the strength of the brand. The strength of a brand is a proxy about the trust of the customers to that brand. The value of the brand is basically captured by whether the customers know and trust the brand. So brand safety is fundamental to the value of the individual companies playing in the marketplace. So trust is not only existential for markets, it's also important for competition through the brand safety channel to begin with that leads to consumer decisions. So these things that don't change. Of course, the world is changing. I'm not saying it's not. And now with these technologies, we do have new threats. For example, the National Security Commission on AI of the US, that was headed by Eric Schmidt, the Google chairman, ex-chairman and CEO, they came up with a report a couple of years ago about what are some major threats at the national security level. Some of them related to disinformation, some of them related to so-called new cyber threats like data poisoning, new terms that come out, model threats, model poisoning, data poisoning, and all sorts of new cybersecurity types of attacks or general attacks online leveraging AI. So yes, there are new threats. And of course, those new threats play both for or against, if you manage them properly, the brand, and for or against the market, the first 2 points I made. Now, some people panic about the risks and the threats. Some people panic about the risks and the threats of these new technologies. I think it's important to be optimistic, so then take a breath. So it's important to be optimistic. I think it's pretty clear that with any new technology, I started by saying technology has been moving the needle of civilization for thousands of years, nothing new here. I mean, we would still be in the caves if we didn't have that. So it keeps pushing us away from the caves to new terrains, to new opportunities, to new value creation. This is just a study I'm sure some of you have seen, a study by McKinsey about the potential value that can be created with AI. 15 trillion plus minus 5 trillion. Right? It doesn't matter whether it's 15 trillion, 20 trillion, 10 trillion. The point is there is enormous value to be created with these technologies, also in terms of managing trust and safety, and therefore brand safety. So I don't think we should be alarmed by all those things. I think we should, of course, have to embrace them, while at the same time being cautiously optimistic and manage the risks. So lots of potential for new value. Lots of potential for new value. Point number 2, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here's an article we wrote with some of my colleagues from INSEAD, but also from BCG and RBS, ex-RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, around the topic of what can we learn about risks online and AI risks and how to manage them from the banking, from the financial sector. The financial sector is probably arguably one of the leading ones in terms of managing risks. At the end of the day, the financial sector is all about the market. And going back to point number 1 that Wackerhoff, 1970, no trust, no market. There is no way the financial sector would work without trust and safety. It just doesn't exist. It fails. It's a market failure. And that's why, of course, for the financial sector, much like for any other marketplace, trust and safety and risk management are vital, much like for the whole economy. So they've been, over the centuries, not just recent, of course, have been developed all sorts of practices, mechanisms, regulations to manage risks. Fraud is nothing new, right? Financial sector knows about this for centuries, not decades. So point number 2 is you can learn from other sectors. All of us can learn from other sectors. In fact, even the regulators learn from other sectors. You all probably, some of you may be hearing, for some of you it's relevant, for some of you it's not, the Digital Services Act, the new European regulation that is in force starting last February, last year for the VLOPs, very large online platforms, this year for everybody, which, by the way, has been, to some extent, being influenced by financial regulations. So, for example, the kind of risks you may be seeing in the industry, fraud or phishing or whatever, have a parallel or various parallels that sometimes, for example, are called AML, anti-money laundering processes, and fraud also, of course, in the financial sector. So much like there are regulations for, let's say, AML, anti-money laundering kind of related risk management, similarly here the incident that one has to manage is not a money laundering necessarily, it can be another incident. Something happening online, something happening offline. So we can set up processes and regulations which kind of put in place practices, processes, principles, the principle of transparency, the principle of fairness and inclusion, the principle of information. So I'll give you some examples here where basically you have to inform and allow people to complain about anything you do regarding, in this case, bringing down content for online platforms, but in general on kind of actions you take towards safeguarding your users, your customers. So point is, there are vital reasons to focus on trust and safety. We know this for centuries, and people got Nobel Prize for this. There are individual business reasons of brand safety. And there are new threats, yes, for sure, there are new threats at the national security level, let alone the business level, right? But there is also enormous value to create with these new technologies. We are not starting from scratch. There's a lot to learn from other sectors also, because the foundations are kind of relatively stable. And there is also lots of new solutions coming into the game, not just regulations that I mentioned, but also technology solutions. This is like the upcoming market of trust and safety solutions, software solutions only. As you see, it's growing, it's almost doubling in like just 5 years or so. Trust and safety solutions are coming to the rescue. So I'm just going to close here from, if I can go to the next slide. So yes, there are risks that are important to manage, but there are also opportunities to create value, and trust and safety can differentiate you and grow the market itself, much like it has been doing so for centuries, not just decades. So I'll leave it here, and I'm happy to connect, of course, anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Theos. To join us in a conversation now, let's please re-welcome to the stage Marnie Wilking, Booking.com's Chief Information and Security Officer. Thank you for joining us. Please do have a seat. Perfect. Lots of great stuff, and I love the optimism, and I'm going to go home and check my lemons in the fruit basket when I get back as a start point. Just a quick one, Theos, building on what's going there. You talk to a lot of companies through INSEAD and also Tremau. Does everybody share the idea that this is a business imperative?
Good question. It depends on the industry, of course. So I mentioned the financial sector, and of course that the financial sector calls it risk management, if you like, right? There is no bank without risk management. So of course, if you go to the financial sector, this is bread and butter. Mm-hmm. Different sectors have matured in different ways. For example, some more online platforms, which are more, let's say, have social implications, more direct. Think about social media, for example, and think about child safety, or think about election integrity, which is a big issue this year. This is becoming a #1 topic in the discussion of everybody. Why? Because it's becoming a #1 topic in the minds of the consumers. At the end of the day, the consumers drive the decisions. The market drives. So when the consumers become more sensitive to these issues, thanks to, I may say, even people like Elon Musk, right, for example, or elections in the US, thanks to all those issues, and geopolitics even, as these issues come top of mind to the consumers, of course it becomes a business imperative for everybody else.
Yeah.
So we see this happening over time.
So we're in the right moment to discuss it.
Right now.
Marnie, coming to you to talk about Booking.com, and I think in the spirit of transparency, we know it hasn't been plain sailing for us in the last 12 to 18 months, but what can you share with what we've learned?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the stage to talk with you. And Theos, trust and safety is such an important topic and definitely one of my favorite topics to talk about. And you're right, we have definitely seen attacks and the impact of those attacks over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, largely in the form of phishing attacks. And phishing, of course, are emails that come in that look like they might be legitimate with malicious links built into them. Obviously, phishing has been around since the dawn of email. But one of the things that we've learned is that some researchers have said since late 2022, when coincidentally ChatGPT was first launched, there's been almost 1,000% increase in the instances of phishing globally. So if you think that you're seeing more phishing and spam hit your inbox, you are not wrong. It's happening. And obviously, AI has played a big part of that, right? The AI gives attackers a way to create really real-looking phishing messages and in many languages and send them at scale. We also know that the cybercriminals are attacking hospitality industry in particular and taking advantage of the helpful nature of hospitality employees. And in fact, hospitality is just behind financial services and government agencies in terms of which industries are being targeted the most.
Yeah.
So we've taken a three-prong approach to dealing with the attacks. One is, we obviously can't stop the attacks. I'd really love to tell the cybercriminals to stop, but I don't think they will. So we are focused on how do we reduce the success rate of those attacks. So things like blocking and detecting when we notice that the phishing emails are coming through. How do we stop people from clicking on them in the first place? When there is a successful attack, because there will be, the law of numbers says that some things will get through. How do we reduce the impact? So how do we prevent those attackers from using what they've gotten to get access to sensitive information? So things like step-up authentication when it looks like there might be suspicious activity. And then third, we've really focused some efforts on education and information sharing and making sure that the partner portal has a lot of information, both on what the attacks mean and also how to protect yourself. And then also from the traveler perspective, making sure that they're aware that there are scammers out there, cyber criminals trying to trick them, and to be very cautious.
Yeah. It's amazing the sophistication. Even though I know they're fake, I still feel guilty not responding to the ones that were by my kids. So such is the way they're playing on our mind. Theo, so let me just come to you and talk about what can we do. In this room we have people from different parts of an industry. It's not a Booking.com angle, it's an our industry angle. How should we be working together to protect our collective industry, do you think?
It's a great question. Of course, let me start by saying, obviously it's not easy to coordinate. But when there is a common incentive and common goal, that benefits everybody, that makes things easier. And I'm going back again to the impact of trust and safety on the growth of a market, of an industry, let alone the competition between the companies. So competition is in a sense secondary to the growth of the pie. So you can collectively grow the pie if you focus on the space. And that's important to understand, because everything starts from alignment of incentive, as we all know, right? So you all have the same incentive, grow the pie. It is very important to realize. If the pie is small, who cares, right? In some ways. That's the first thing. Second thing is that always, of course, and it's been the case in other industries and other risk management, let's say, or I call it risk management more broadly, because trust safety is one version of it. Big players in the industries always played a role in driving the whole industry, right? Because, first of all, big players set the tone also, because they set the tone, set the requirements, even through partnerships and procurement requirements. So you have to make sure that there are standards and requirements that are driven through procurement and partnerships.
Yep.
Right? That's very second thing. And third thing, of course, there are technological solutions always. And I'll give you an extreme example I mentioned before. You have issues of phishing in the hospitality, but there are bigger challenges in the world, arguably, that has to do with the life of people.
Yep.
Right? And I'm going back to CSAM, child sexual abuse material, because that's something that all of us agree. And when there's agreement in that space, for example, there are technologies and players that rely on, for example, hash-based cryptographic sharing of material across the industry for that problem. Because if you understand that you grow the pie together, and you set up standards starting from bigger players, then coming up with solutions like sharing information in a secure way in order to solve this big common problem, since I'm being an example one that is not yours but others, is more natural to do.
Yeah. So it's sort of our responsibility, having sort of put the O into OTA in a certain sense to drive the industry. So Marnie, did you want to build on that?
Yeah, I was going to build on your second point there. The ability to share information, the need to share information. As a leader in the industry, I feel it's Booking.com's responsibility to make sure that we are playing a part in sharing the information and educating not just our partners, but the rest of the industry as well. And so to that end, early last year, we joined the Retail and Hospitality Information Sharing and Analysis Center, so a sharing forum for cybersecurity issues in particular, but it includes a lot of our larger partners and their security teams and fraud teams. And so we spend a lot of time sharing information with one another and making sure that we understand what those threat vectors look like, what the attacks look like, how best to defend against them, what we're learning from them. And we also, Booking.com has led an effort around an OTA work group for how do we set standards, how do we look at what we do within the cybersecurity industry for the hospitality industry as a whole.
Marnie, what would you say for these small players, if we think about the long tail that we do serve, who don't have an IT department or don't have a security department? How can we help all of the people?
Yeah, it's really about helping the ecosystem, right? The rising tide raises all boats. So if we can help one another, and then for those folks that don't, for the homes and the smaller partners that may not have the big IT teams and the cybersecurity teams, if we can share the information and help them implement those things as well, we all get better. And Booking.com is implementing some things. We know that the cyber criminals are using AI, obviously, and they're getting really good at cyber attacks and phishing because of it. But a lot of companies have developed AI defenses as well. And so we've put a lot of effort into things like detecting and blocking and canceling fake reservations within minutes, near real time. We are actively reviewing and blocking what look like malicious links coming through our messaging platform and have blocked a fairly high percentage of those. So there's a lot of things that we're putting in place, including how do we automate the support process for partners and customers to get help to you all faster.
Yeah. So Theodoros, AI is in your blood. We know that's what you do a lot of. The bad guys are getting smarter. It's very sophisticated. So what advice do you give companies, ourselves, and obviously in the audience, to get ahead? What would you say?
So it's a bit of a cat and mouse indeed. Hopefully the cat will be faster than the mouse eventually.
I've got my running shoes on.
Exactly. So, of course, a lot of it has to do with setting up the right processes in place. People talk a lot about AI governance. Governance can have different connotations depending on whom you talk to. But putting the right processes and practice and principles in place is very important. And then second is like there's a lot of new solutions I mentioned already, like the market of trust and safety software solutions that help make all the processes efficient is booming. It's kind of doubling in 5 years. So once you have the process principles in place, and the governance, if you may call it that way, the implementation can be supported with technologies, including AI technologies, as you mentioned, to help us with this. So AI can help us with AI issues and other general risks. And finally, it's a lot about education of the users, supporting the community, and managing the information, of course, flow across the ecosystem.
Yeah. Did you want to add anything?
I just want to say, one of the other things that we've been doing is making sure that we're sharing information with the community, not just within our HISAC. And so we're trying to host more discussions and roundtables. And if there are folks that are interested in that, I would love to put that together. So please share that with your security and trust and safety teams, because again, sharing that information is really important. And we can talk about cybersecurity, we can talk about fraud, we can talk about the rest of the trust and safety space overall. And I want to give a special shout out to the folks that joined us yesterday afternoon, in fact, because we hosted one of those discussion groups. And it was really, it felt very good to both share our threat analysis and the intel that we're seeing, but also get the questions, get the insights from the partners in the room so that we could understand what you're seeing on the ground so that we can make the little tweaks that we need to help you.
It's a fascinating topic, and I'd love to talk more about it, but we don't have time in this session now. But there is, in the breakouts later this afternoon, specifically one dedicated. We can, if you want to get into deep dives on this. But if I just summarize up what we've heard sort of very briefly, obviously, our industry is attractive now because we're at that stage where there's something for the bad guys to go after. So it's sort of a double-handed compliment. But the bad guys are more sophisticated, and there's reasons, I did very much took away, there's reasons to be positive, and there's lessons we can learn elsewhere, so we can get ahead. But we need to educate each other, and I see our role as helping to educate all of our partners there. And together, I think this industry can and will get ahead of this. And lastly, but of course not importantly here, AI can actually really help us to improve our ability to identify, to prevent, and to respond to these attacks when we address it. And that's also the topic coming up straight after here, to get into how we look at AI, and we do that responsibly so that we don't start on the wrong footing there. So lots of things coming together. It's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you both of you for joining us and taking your time out. Please join me in saying thank you.
Thank you very much.